All right, I'm going to talk to the slides for just a minute here. We have this next slide up in our PowerPoint from our previous one here. We're identifying all the different parts and pieces of the battery, just like we did it in person on the dock cam. We have our capacity, our discharge rate, cell count, voltage, the connectors here, and we have a little calculation down here below that talks about the C rating. Okay, so that helps us understand what we're doing. All right. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty clear. Here's some other examples of other batteries. And you can see they all have labels that pretty much give you the same information. We have 1,000 milliamp hours here, our C rating, our series count, 6S, so 6-cell battery in series, 22.2 volts. Here's our watt hours as well. Some batteries list that, some batteries don't. Okay. Another one here, similar to the one I showed you on the dot cam. This one's a little bit larger, but again, we see all those same details on each battery. So if you want to do a little, self test here, you can look at each of these batteries, these extra ones, and try to identify what they are. And then you can see if you can calculate what the actual output in amps would be of this battery. So do a little calculation with the C rating there, or for this one here, or for this monster battery here. That's a huge one. 20 amp hours, that's a monster battery. All right. Here's some calculations. So we went over kind of part of this before. We got to see how many amps the battery would put out in general, I guess we could say. And this takes it one step further and actually says, well, this is how long the battery would last if you were flying it. And you have to have some extra information for this and know how many amps you're going to be asking for from the battery while you're flying. But this example here says you have an aircraft on average that draws 10 amps of power over the course of a flight. So let's say you got your buddy already bought the plane. He's flown it a couple times. He's measured the amp output, and he says, "Hey, this plane, I'll probably cruise around 10 amps or so. That's my average. Okay, sweet. So if I say, what if I want to buy this battery? How do I know how long that battery is going to last, right? You want to figure out how much the battery weighs and stuff too for the plane, but how long would that battery last? Let's say if I shoved it in the plane, if it fit in there, it was working weight-wise and size-wise, how long could I fly it for? So first we do our calculation here to get our milliamp hours to amp hours, okay? And then we have our amp hours, 2.25 amp hours, divided by 10 amps, because that's on average how much this aircraft takes to kind of fly around, okay? And so we say 2.25 amp hours divided by 10 amps equals 0.225 hours, okay? And to get hours to minutes, we just multiply the decimal by 60, and that gives us 13.5 minutes of flight time approximately. Okay, down here's just another way of doing the math. We do the amp hours times 60 first to get amp minutes, and then we take amp minutes and divide by amps to get minutes. Either way, you're just canceling out the units. Okay, I'll leave this up for a second so you can pause the video if you want, or you can review these slides, of course, on Canvas. But if you're trying to figure out how long a battery would actually last and you knew the approximate amp draw of your aircraft, this would be how you'd figure out how long that battery would last. Okay, and that's, again, theoretically, you still got to account for weight of the battery in the aircraft and that kind of thing. You can't just put a huge battery in there, because who knows if it would even fly with a battery that was that large. So there's a little bit of back and forth when you're trying to figure out the ideal battery for your aircraft. All right. Here's a little cutaway diagram here of a battery, right? We've got the wrapping kind of cutaway, the outside colored plastic part cutaway, and we see the cells on the inside there. This top one here has the cell kind of cutaway as well. This would be like a 3-cell battery. This one cell is cut away here, then the 2 others that are still wrapped. And here's the outside wrap. Next, we see our main connector here coming off the negative here and the positive down here, so the cells are wired in series like we talked about. And then we see the balance JST XH balance plug, just the balance lead there, coming off each individual cell. And there's our 2 battery power leads, basically. Okay, let's go here. Let's look at some of the wiring. So this is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the series wiring. Okay, we have, this is a 3-cell diagram. So we have our output, negative and positive. Those would be our large connector that we plug into our aircraft. We have our balance lead right here. So we can see the cells are wired in series because we go from, if we follow it through, we go positive into the battery, negative out here into the positive here, negative out here into the positive out here, negative out here into the connector. So they're wired in series as if they were all 3 kind of one, I guess, large battery in that case, in that way. And then we have the individual wires coming off of each cell essentially to form our balance connector, allowing each cell to have an interface which for the battery charger, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Here's another diagram of a multiple example of battery cells wired in series. This is the most common way to see lithium polymer batteries done, so that's why we have a lot of examples. But again, we have our positive, negative for the main connector here, and then we have our batteries wired in series. So you see a little kind of jumper there going between, and over here we see between. So they're all wired in series, and then we have the balanced leads coming off of each individual cell, essentially. Okay. So that's what it looks like on the inside the battery with where the wires are actually going, and the cells are wired together in that way. So let's go back over here to our, get my pen out again here. Let's see, switch. There we go. Excuse me, sorry that cough. Hopefully that wasn't too loud. Okay, but we see here, so we'd really have kind of little jumpers like this going from the cells, okay, and the balance lead would come from those little jumpers, 1, 2, 3, okay, and it would go basically between each cell and then have a negative lead as well. All right, so we have one over here. Sorry, I forgot to draw that. 1, 2, 3, and then a negative. I know it's getting pretty messy up in there now, but you can kind of get the idea from this as well as the PowerPoint just showed you how those cells are actually wired. Okay, so if we're going to discuss that for a minute, okay, so we have a 3S battery. All right, so 3 series. My pen is having some trouble. Okay, and so what's not written in the description of the battery, if you see 3S, is that 3S, okay, 1P would be the full name of that battery, right? And what this is saying is kind of the opposite, parallel. So it's saying 3 series, 1 parallel. Okay? And if there's 1 in parallel with itself, there's not anything in parallel, so there's no need to really write this. That's why it's usually just labeled 3S. Okay? But there are sometimes you'll see batteries, maybe say it was a 3S 2P. Okay, what does that mean, right? What are we talking about? So 3 cells in series, 2 in parallel. There's a good diagram in our textbook in the section on batteries that kind of shows you a little bit of this. I'm going to try to recreate it here. So if we have, let's say 1, 2, 3 cells, kind of like our cells over here, right, but on their side. Okay, we could have our battery just consist of those 3 cells, and that would be a 3S battery. So we have our power lead coming off here. Here's our power lead, okay? But if we have additional cells, let's see, 1, 2, 3 right here, okay, and each of these cells are wired in parallel, okay, then we have 3 in series, 1, 2, 3, and then 2 in parallel. We'll just kind of draw some lines right there to kind of symbolize that. So in this case, there's actually 6 physical cells in the battery, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but they're wired in such a way that the only thing you're going to see out of the connector here, the voltage-wise, is 3S voltage, okay? But there are 6 physical cells in here. Now, what does that mean? It means maybe the manufacturer had a certain size of cell. Let's say they're, making cells that were, we'll just say, for the sake of example, just say 1, okay? And they wanted to make a battery that was larger than 1, okay? So they want to make a battery that was had more capacity. And so they took the same cells and they used those 1 cells and they put them in parallel here and series here. Okay, what that does is it gives the battery capacity increase. Okay, right? But the voltage is the same. Okay, you could have a 3S with just these cells. So 1, 2, 3, and the voltage is going to be 3S. You can have a battery with 6 cells, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but if they're wired in parallel here, then it's still going to be 3S voltage. Okay, so 3S 2P means there's 2 parallel. If we had a larger number, let's say 3S 3P, okay, we'd have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, okay? We'd have 9 cells total, right? The voltage would still be that same voltage, right? 3S voltage, but we actually have 9 physical cells. Right? You don't see it that commonly, but sometimes in really large batteries, like extremely large batteries, you might see them use a combination of smaller cells to get the capacity that they want without having to manufacture cells that are so huge. But this is out there sometimes. Often you won't see it at all. You'll just see the 3S, oops, 4S, 5S, and they're all missing, the whatever it is P. And if they're missing that, if not on the description, that means they don't have any cells in parallel. It's just 5 cells in series or 6 cells in series or whatever it is. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. If you know anything about batteries, you probably already know some of this stuff. But if you're interested in things like electric cars and things like that, they have lots and lots and lots of batteries in the cars. And some of the batteries are wired in series, some of them wired in parallel, right? Because they have to balance both the voltage they want to supply as well as the capacity of the batteries. And so that's kind of that, I guess, back and forth there a little bit. All right, let's go back to the slides here for a second. Okay, let's pause there. Our next section, we'll talk about battery charging.